Daniel Cole had long ago stopped believing in glamorous nights or sparkling chandeliers. His life was measured in the grease stains on his coveralls, the clink of tools in his modest auto shop, and the soft laughter of his 7-year-old daughter, Emily. That was enough for him. After his wife passed away 3 years ago, Daniel had learned to build a world where joy came from the small, ordinary things. Pancake breakfasts on Sundays, bedtime stories read by a tired but loving father, and Emily's hand tucked into his when they crossed the street. The idea of rubbing shoulders with billionaires and CEOs belonged to another universe, one Daniel had no intention of stepping into. And yet, the letter lay on his kitchen counter that evening, embossed with gold trim, the kind of stationery that looked absurdly out of place among grocery receipts and unpaid bills. Emily sat at the table, swinging her legs, her dark curls bouncing with every movement. She clutched the invitation as though it were a treasure map. "Daddy, it says we're invited to the Whitmore Foundation Charity Gala." Her eyes sparkled. "That's where the rich people go, right, with the big dresses and music and everything." Daniel wiped his hands on a rag, leaving faint traces of oil even after he'd tried to scrub clean. He sighed. "Sweetheart, that's not for people like us. They probably mailed this by mistake." Emily frowned. "But it has our names on it, Mr. Daniel Cole and guest, that's us." He leaned against the counter, staring at the invitation again. The Whitmore Foundation was run by Clara Whitmore, the heiress who had turned her late father's company into an empire. Her name filled business headlines weekly. He had no idea why someone like her would invite a local mechanic and his daughter. "Emily," Daniel said carefully, "those events, they're not really for kids. They're full of suits and gowns and people talking about business deals, boring stuff." Emily crossed her arms in an exaggerated huff. "It's not boring if they have dancing. Mommy used to take me to the rec center for dancing. Remember?" Daniel's heart squeezed. He remembered all too well, his wife twirling Emily around, their laughter echoing in the small hall. The memory was both beautiful and painful. He hadn't danced since his wife died. The thought of stepping onto a dance floor again made his chest tighten. Still, Emily's hopeful expression was hard to resist. "Please, Daddy," she whispered. "Can we go just this once? I want to see the lights and the music, and maybe we can dance together like we used to." Her voice trembled at the end, and Daniel knew he was defeated. He would do anything to put that smile back on her face. 2 nights later, Daniel found himself adjusting the collar of his only suit in front of a cracked mirror. It wasn't new. He had worn it at his wife's funeral, but Emily insisted he looked handsome like a prince. Emily herself was radiant in a little blue dress she had begged him to buy from the thrift store. She twirled in the living room, the skirt flaring, her excitement too big to contain. "You're going to knock everyone's socks off," Daniel said, trying to match her enthusiasm. "You too, Daddy. Maybe the CEO lady will dance with you," Emily teased. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "That's not going to happen, kiddo." The gala was held at the Grand Marlowe Hotel, a towering building of glass and marble that seemed to scrape the stars. Daniel felt smaller with every step toward the glittering entrance, surrounded by sleek cars and chauffeurs. He parked his old pickup 3 blocks away, hoping nobody would notice. Inside, the ballroom shimmered. Golden chandeliers poured light over crystal glasses, polished floors, and gowns worth more than his yearly income. Waiters in white gloves carried trays of hors d'oeuvres Daniel couldn't even name. Emily clung to his hand, her eyes wide in wonder. "Daddy, it's like a fairy tale." He forced a smile, ignoring the way people's gazes lingered on his suit, the whispers that followed. "Who let a mechanic in here?" one man muttered to his companion. Victor Hale, a tall man with sharp features and an even sharper smirk, sauntered past. Daniel didn't know him, but Victor's gaze swept over him with open disdain. "Well, Whitmore is feeling generous tonight, inviting charity cases, I see." Daniel bristled but said nothing. He had learned long ago that fighting back only gave bullies more power. He guided Emily deeper into the crowd, trying to keep her shielded from the snide remarks. At the far end of the room, Clara Whitmore herself stood near the stage. She wore an elegant silver gown, her posture flawless, her expression cool. The cameras loved her. Flashes popped as photographers tried to capture every angle of the untouchable CEO. Daniel noticed, however, the flicker of weariness in her eyes, the practiced smile that didn't quite reach her. Emily tugged at his sleeve. "That's her daddy, the CEO lady. She looks like a princess." Daniel nodded but stayed at the edge of the crowd. He had no intention of being noticed. He planned to stay for a little while, let Emily enjoy the spectacle, and then slip out before anyone made more comments about the mechanic who didn't belong. Still, as the orchestra began to play and couples drifted onto the dance floor, Daniel felt the heaviness in his chest return. Emily looked longingly at them, her small hands twisting together, her body swaying slightly to the music. She turned to him, her voice soft. "Daddy, will you dance with me? Just one song." Daniel froze, the memory of his late wife dancing flooding back so vividly it almost knocked the breath from him. He swallowed hard, searching for words, but all that came was a pained silence. Emily's shoulders drooped. She looked away, hiding her disappointment, and shuffled toward a cluster of other children watching near the edge of the floor. Daniel's heart broke, but before he could move, something unexpected happened. From across the ballroom, Clara Whitmore's gaze landed on him. Her expression flickered, first curiosity, then something unreadable. She stepped away from her circle of investors and walked straight toward Daniel, her gown sweeping across the polished floor. The crowd parted instinctively, whispers rippling through the room. Daniel stiffened. Why on earth would someone like her walk toward him? Clara stopped just inches away, her presence commanding yet strangely soft. She held out her hand, her eyes never leaving his. "Dance with me for just one song," she said. Gasps spread through the ballroom. Daniel stood frozen, his heart pounding louder than the orchestra, as every eye in the room turned to see what he would do. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought he'd misheard her. Clara Whitmore, billionaire CEO, the woman half the room was vying to impress, was holding out her hand to him, a mechanic in a worn suit. "Me," he managed, his voice rough. Her lips curved, though it wasn't quite a smile, more like a challenge. "Yes, you." Gasps turned into murmurs around them. Some laughed under their breath. Others pulled out phones, already recording. Clara Whitmore never danced at her own galas. Never. Daniel glanced down at Emily, who was staring up at him with round, pleading eyes. "Please, Daddy." His chest tightened. He wanted to refuse. He hadn't danced since his wife died. The thought alone felt like betraying her memory. But Emily's hope was too fragile to crush again. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he placed his rough, calloused hand into Clara's perfectly manicured one. A ripple went through the crowd. The orchestra swelled, violins gliding into a waltz. Clara led him onto the polished floor, the chandeliers glinting above them. Daniel felt every stare like a weight pressing into his shoulders. He didn't belong here, and they all knew it. Clara, however, seemed utterly unaffected. She slid her hand onto his shoulder, her eyes steady on his. "Relax," she murmured so only he could hear. "It's just a dance." "Easy for you to say," Daniel muttered, his jaw tight. "You've probably done this 1,000 times." "Not like this," she replied softly. Her tone caught him off guard. There was no arrogance in it, only a kind of honesty that tugged at him. The first few steps were clumsy. Daniel hadn't waltzed in years, and his boots felt heavy against the gleaming floor. Clara guided him subtly, her movements graceful but patient, giving him room to find the rhythm. He focused on Emily at the edge of the floor, her face lit with wonder. That sight steadied him. Slowly, the stiffness left his body, muscle memory stirring from the years when he and his wife had danced in the kitchen after Emily went to bed. Clara's gown shimmered as she turned with him. Her perfume was faint, something floral and elegant, and for the first time Daniel realized how close they were, closer than he'd been to anyone in years. Around them, the whispers grew louder. "Who is he?" "A mechanic, I think." Clara Whitmore dancing with a nobody, Unbelievable. Victor Hale, standing near the bar, barked a laugh. Look at him, doesn't even know how to hold her properly. Daniel stiffened, about to step back, but Clara's grip on his hand tightened. Ignore them, she whispered, her eyes flashing. Just look at me. And for a moment he did. He saw not the ice-cold CEO the tabloids adored, but a woman whose gaze carried exhaustion, longing, and something like gratitude. The music carried them. Step by step, Daniel grew steadier, his movements more confident. When he spun Clara, hesitant at first, then firmer, an audible gasp went through the room. Clara laughed, not the polite, calculated laugh she usually offered the press, but something genuine, free. The sound startled him almost as much as it startled the guests. See, she said, breathless, you can dance. Daniel shook his head, a small smile tugging despite himself. I'm just following your lead. Then follow it to the end. The orchestra swelled toward its climax. For those few minutes, Daniel forgot about the whispers, the stares, the sharp edges of grief that usually clung to him. All that existed was Emily's awestruck smile and Clara's hand steady in his. When the song ended, silence fell before the applause. It started hesitant, a few claps here and there, then swelled into thunder as the crowd acknowledged what they had witnessed. Clara Whitmore, dancing with a man who wasn't rich, wasn't powerful, just a single dad who somehow matched her step for step. Daniel's face burned. He released her hand quickly, stepping back. Thank you, he muttered, his voice low. Clara tilted her head, studying him. For what? For not letting me make a fool of myself, he said. Her lips curved again, that almost smile returning. You didn't. But before Daniel could answer, Victor Hale strode forward, his smirk venomous. Well, that was charming, Victor drawled, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The queen of Whitmore Industries waltzing with the help. What's next, Clara? Shall we invite him to join the board of directors? Laughter rippled from a few of Victor's cronies. Daniel's stomach knotted, shame prickling his skin. He reached for Emily, ready to retreat, but Clara stepped forward instead. Her voice was calm, sharp as glass. Careful, Victor. The last man who underestimated someone in this room lost his job. The laughter died instantly. Victor's smirk faltered. Clara turned back to Daniel, her gaze softer now. Don't leave yet, stay, enjoy the night. Daniel wanted to protest, but Emily's eyes were shining with pride, her little hands clapping as though he were the star of the show. He couldn't take that away from her. Still, as he stood there with every eye in the room on him, Daniel couldn't help but wonder what price he would pay for stepping into a world that was never meant for him. The orchestra's final note faded into the echoing chamber, leaving behind a murmur of voices, clinking glasses, and the faint rustle of gowns as couples drifted from the floor. Daniel felt his shoulders relax slightly, though his hand still tingled where Clara's fingers had rested. He tried to slip toward the edge of the room, but Emily darted in front of him, her little face glowing. Daddy, you danced, you really danced, she beamed, bouncing on her toes. Mommy would have loved it. Daniel's chest tightened at the mention of his late wife, but he forced a smile for Emily's sake. It was just one song, kiddo. Then do another, she pleaded, with me this time. Her small hand reached for his, eyes wide with hope. For an instant, Daniel wanted nothing more than to scoop her up and twirl her the way he used to, but grief wrapped around him like barbed wire. The last time he had danced with Emily had been at his wife's hospital fundraiser, just weeks before she passed. Since then, every step felt like betrayal. He crouched down, brushing a curl from Emily's cheek. Not tonight, sweetheart. Daddy's not ready. Her smile faltered. She looked down, kicking the hem of her dress. Okay, she whispered, her voice small. She turned and walked back to the other children at the side of the ballroom, shoulders slumped. Daniel's throat ached. He hated himself for letting her down again. Trouble in paradise? Victor Hale's mocking voice cut through his thoughts. He was leaning against a marble column, drink in hand, watching Daniel with amused disdain. Looks like even your daughter knows you're not cut out for this world. Daniel straightened, his fists tightening. Leave her out of this. Victor chuckled, taking a slow sip of champagne. Relax, mechanic. I'm only pointing out the obvious. You don't belong here. People like you are background noise. Daniel's jaw clenched, but before he could retort, a shadow fell across them both. Clara. Victor, she said coolly, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. I don't recall asking for your commentary on my guests. Victor's smirk faltered. He gave a mock bow. Of course, Clara, always a pleasure. With that, he slunk away, though not without a final glare at Daniel. Daniel exhaled, tension still coiled tight in his chest. He expected Clara to follow the crowd of investors waiting for her near the stage, but instead she lingered. She wanted to dance with you, Clara said quietly, her gaze on Emily. Why didn't you? Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. It's complicated. Clara studied him for a long moment, then looked toward the band as the conductor tapped his baton for the next piece. The violins began again, the notes light and playful, filling the ballroom with fresh energy. Without warning, Clara turned back to him. Then dance with me again. Daniel blinked. What? You said you couldn't dance with her. Clara's eyes softened, though her voice remained steady. So dance with me instead, show her you can. His heart stuttered. I know that's... But she didn't give him time to finish. She reached out, took his hand, and led him toward the center of the floor once more. The crowd murmured louder this time, a wave of disbelief and intrigue spreading across the room. Emily's eyes widened as she saw her father being pulled back into the spotlight. Her disappointment melted into awe. The music lifted, brighter than before. Clara placed her hand on his shoulder again, her other hand lacing through his. Forget them, she murmured. This isn't for them. Daniel swallowed hard. His body resisted at first, the grief pulling at his limbs, whispering that this was wrong. But when he caught sight of Emily at the edge of the floor, her eyes wide, her little hands clasped together in excitement, he forced himself to move. Step, turn, step. The rhythm returned like an old friend. Clara's presence steadied him, her confidence radiating through every movement. The crowd blurred into a wash of colors and murmurs until all he could see was Emily smiling again. Clara leaned closer, her voice low. That's what she needed, not perfection, just her dad trying. Daniel's throat tightened. He hadn't expected kindness beneath Clara Whitmore's polished exterior, but there it was, real, unguarded. When the song ended, the applause was louder than before. Emily clapped the hardest, bouncing up and down, her laughter carrying across the ballroom. Daniel stepped back quickly, almost too quickly, his chest rising and falling as if he'd run a mile. Clara tilted her head, her gaze unreadable. Better, she said softly. Daniel didn't know what to say. He only knew that something had shifted, not just in the way the crowd saw him, but in the way Emily did. And though he wouldn't admit it, in the way Clara did too. The orchestra didn't pause between songs this time. It swept straight into another waltz, bold and swelling, like the ballroom itself was challenging Daniel not to run. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to melt into the shadows where he belonged, but Clara's hand still rested lightly in his, anchoring him in place. And Emily's face was lit brighter than any chandelier in the room. He couldn't walk away now. Clara moved first, guiding him into the first turn. Daniel's boots scuffed against the polished floor, his steps heavy and uncertain. He muttered under his breath, I'm going to trip over my own feet. You won't, Clara said firmly, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Just breathe, trust me. Trust her? He almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Trusting billionaires was not something Daniel Cole made a habit of. But when she looked at him with those steady eyes, he found himself obeying. Step, step, turn. At first he was stiff, his shoulders hunched like a man bracing for impact. But then Clara's hand pressed lightly against his, guiding, steadying. She wasn't leading with arrogance, she was coaxing him, patient in a way he hadn't expected. The murmurs around the room grew louder. Guests leaned in, fanning themselves, whispering like they were watching a scandal unfold. Whitmore's lost her mind. First dance fine, but again. He looks like a construction worker, for heaven's sake. Daniel clenched his jaw, every word digging at old wounds of not being enough. He started to pull back. Clara's grip tightened. Ignore them. He shook his head. Easy for you to say. Her eyes locked onto his. No, harder for me. They expect me to be perfect, untouchable, and yet here I am choosing to dance with you. Do you know why? He blinked, thrown by the intensity in her tone. Why? Because you don't see me as they do. The words hit deeper than he expected. For a second, the room blurred, the music dimming until it felt like they were the only two people in the world. His steps grew steadier. The memory of his late wife rose again, sharp and bittersweet, but instead of freezing him, it carried him. He remembered her voice teasing him, "Relax, Daniel, just follow the music." So he did. Step turned step. He spun Clara, not perfectly, not with the grace of the tuxedoed men watching from the sidelines, but with something real. She laughed, startled, delighted, her silver gown catching the light as she twirled back into his arms. The laugh silenced the whispers more effectively than a shouted order. No one had ever heard Clara Whitmore laugh like that, not investors, not the press, not even her closest staff. It wasn't polished or practiced. It was warm. Daniel felt something shift in the air. The murmurs changed tone, less mockery, more disbelief. Is that really Clara? She looks happy. With him. The music swelled, and with it, Daniel's confidence. He lifted his chin, straightening his posture, letting his body remember what it was to move freely. He hadn't realized how much he missed this, the rush of music, the connection of two people moving in sync. He glanced toward the edge of the floor. Emily was standing on a chair now, clapping, her little face lit with joy. Tears pricked at Daniel's eyes, but for once they weren't from grief. When the final notes rang out, Daniel dipped Clara slightly, a move so instinctive he didn't know he remembered how. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed. Clara looked up at him, her eyes bright, her lips parted as though she wanted to say something but couldn't. For a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to the space between them. Then the applause began. It started scattered, hesitant. Then it grew, rolling across the ballroom until the sound thundered in Daniel's ears. Strangers were applauding him. He released Clara quickly, stepping back, his face flushed. I didn't mean. You were perfect, Clara said, cutting him off. Daniel shook his head. I'm not, this isn't me, I don't belong here. Clara tilted her head, studying him with a gaze that made his pulse jump. Maybe you belong more than anyone else. Before he could respond, Emily darted through the crowd and flung herself into his arms. Daddy, that was amazing. You were like a prince. Daniel hugged her tight, swallowing the lump in his throat. For the first time in years, Emily's eyes were shining without a shadow of sadness behind them. But as he held her, Daniel felt the weight of every stare still fixed on him. The ballroom might be clapping now, but he knew how quickly admiration could turn back into ridicule. He wasn't sure he could put Emily, or himself, through that again. And yet, when Clara reached out and brushed a curl from Emily's cheek, something unspoken passed between them. For the first time, Daniel wondered if maybe, just maybe, this night would change everything. The applause faded slowly, leaving the ballroom buzzing with curiosity and tension. Guests drifted closer, champagne flutes in hand, their eyes flicking between Clara and Daniel like they were watching a story unfold on stage. Daniel shifted Emily onto his hip, wishing he could vanish into the crowd. He had no business standing in the center of this glittering world, not after a dance that felt more like a dream than reality. That's when Victor Stanton stepped forward. Victor, sharp in his tailored tuxedo, moved like he owned the floor. His smirk carried the smugness of a man who'd never been told no. He clapped slowly, deliberately, the sound echoing with mockery rather than praise. Well, he drawled, his voice loud enough to carry. That was charming, the janitor and the princess. A ripple of laughter spread among certain guests, those who took their cues from Victor, eager to stay in his favor. Daniel stiffened, his hand tightening around Emily's small shoulder. Victor's eyes gleamed. "Tell me, Daniel, was that your first time in shoes that weren't covered in grease?" Emily frowned, her little voice piping up before Daniel could stop her. "My daddy's not just a janitor, he fixes everything." The laughter turned into murmurs. Some guests smiled at Emily's courage, others exchanged uncomfortable glances. Victor arched an eyebrow, pretending sympathy. "Adorable, but this is a gala, sweetheart, not a playground." His gaze slid back to Daniel, sharp as a knife. "Why don't you prove you belong here? Fix something real. The generator in the garden has been faulty all night. If you can fix it before dessert is served." He paused for effect. "Then maybe we'll take you seriously." Daniel's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth, ready to tell Victor exactly where he could shove his challenge, when Clara stepped forward. "Enough." Her voice sliced through the room, cold and commanding. All chatter died instantly. Clara's heels clicked against the marble as she moved to stand between Daniel and Victor. Her chin lifted, her shoulders squared, a CEO in full command. "Victor, you forget yourself." Victor gave a mocking bow. "Forgive me, Clara, I thought you enjoyed games." "I don't tolerate cruelty," she shot back. "And this," she gestured to Daniel and Emily, "is not your stage." The room buzzed with shock. Clara Whitmore, known for her iron composure and ruthless precision, was openly defending a janitor. Against Victor Stanton, no less, a man with deep pockets and powerful friends. Daniel's heart pounded. He should have felt grateful, but instead he felt cornered. He didn't want Clara fighting his battles, not when Emily was watching. "I'll do it," Daniel said suddenly. All eyes turned to him. Emily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy." Daniel forced a smile for her. "It's okay, sweetheart, I can handle it." He set her down gently and faced Victor. "You want me to fix your generator? Fine, but not to prove anything to you." His voice grew stronger, echoing across the room. "I'll do it because no kid should sit in the dark tonight. Not mine, not anyone's." A stunned silence followed. Clara's eyes widened, not with doubt, but with something like pride. Victor's smirk faltered just slightly. "Then by all means, show us what you can do." Clara stepped closer to Daniel, her voice low so only he could hear. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do," he whispered back. His eyes flicked to Emily, then to the sea of faces waiting to watch him fail. For her. Clara hesitated, then nodded once, as if sealing an unspoken pact. And just like that, Daniel Cole, the janitor, the single dad, the man who'd never been invited into ballrooms, walked out of the grand hall toward the garden, every eye on his back. Some waited for him to fail. Some hoped he would succeed. And one woman, the CEO who just defended him against her world, found herself holding her breath. The night air was cool as Daniel stepped into the garden, the hum of chatter trailing behind him. Lanterns lined the pathway, glowing faintly, though one corner of the grounds sat in near darkness, the place where the generator had failed. He rolled up his sleeves, ignoring the stares pressing into his back. Guests had followed, forming a curious semicircle at a safe distance, eager to see the janitor fumble. Emily clung to Clara's hand, whispering, "Daddy can do it. He always fixes things." Clara squeezed the little girl's hand, her eyes never leaving Daniel. The generator sat hidden behind a row of hedges, a hulking metal beast that smelled faintly of gasoline and damp wires. Daniel crouched beside it, his instincts kicking in. He'd worked with machines bigger and dirtier than this, but tonight the stakes were different. This wasn't just about power. It was about pride, dignity, and showing his daughter the kind of man he was. He unscrewed the panel and peered inside. The wiring was a mess, loose, poorly maintained, like someone had patched it together without real care. "Figures," he muttered. From behind him came Victor's voice, slick with amusement. "Need a manual janitor." Daniel didn't turn. He pulled a screwdriver from his pocket. He always carried tools, a habit born from years of being the man who fixed what others overlooked. "No," he said calmly. "Just a minute." Clara crossed her arms, glaring at Victor. Why don't you give him space? Unless you're afraid of what happens if he succeeds. Victor's smile tightened, but he said nothing. Daniel worked quickly, stripping back frayed wires, twisting them with practiced precision. Sparks crackled once, drawing a gasp from the crowd, but his hands stayed steady. He thought of Emily, of every time she'd whispered, "Daddy, can you fix it?" A toy, a bike, a broken heart. He had never let her down, and he wouldn't start now. Minutes stretched long. The crowd shifted impatiently, whispers growing. Victor smirked wider, already tasting victory. But then Daniel straightened, wiped his hands on his slacks, and flipped the switch. The generator roared to life. One by one, the darkened lanterns flickered, then glowed steady and bright. The garden bathed in golden light, washing over the stunned faces of the onlookers. A beat of silence, then applause, not mocking but genuine. Emily cheered, racing forward. "Daddy, you did it!" She threw her arms around his neck, and Daniel lifted her high, relief softening his tired face. Clara's lips curved, something warm breaking through her usual composure. Pride, admiration, and maybe something deeper. Victor's smirk had vanished, his jaw tight as whispers turned against him. Daniel met Clara's gaze across the garden. No words passed between them, but something unspoken did. Respect, understanding, a fragile bridge beginning to form. For the first time that night, Daniel didn't feel like a man out of place. He felt like a man who belonged, because he'd made the light shine when no one else could. After the cheers died down, the guests slowly drifted back toward the ballroom, chattering about the spectacle they'd just witnessed. But Clara didn't move. She lingered in the glow of the lanterns, her eyes fixed on Daniel as though she were seeing him for the first time. Emily clung to her father's hand, bouncing on her toes with excitement. "Daddy, everyone clapped for you, did you see?" Daniel chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I saw, kiddo. Guess all those years of fixing toasters finally paid off." Clara stepped closer, her heels crunching softly against the gravel. There was something unguarded in her expression, stripped of the polished CEO mask she usually wore. "You didn't just fix a generator," she said quietly. "You gave this night back to me." Daniel shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "It was just a machine. Anyone could have done it." "No," Clara's voice was firm, her gaze steady. "Not anyone. Victor wouldn't have touched it. Half the men in there wouldn't even know where to start." She tilted her head, a small smile forming. "You made it look effortless." He felt a warmth creeping into his chest, the kind he hadn't felt in years, not since before life had stripped away comfort and left him with little but responsibility. He cleared his throat, trying to steer the moment away. "Effortless isn't the word I'd use, but I'm glad I could help." Emily tugged Clara's sleeve suddenly. "Did you see Daddy's hands? They moved so fast, like a superhero." Clara laughed, a sound that startled even herself. It had been a long time since laughter had come easily. She crouched down to Emily's level, her eyes softening. "You're right. Your daddy was the hero tonight." The little girl beamed, then darted off to chase fireflies at the edge of the garden, leaving the two adults standing in the hush of the evening. For a moment neither spoke. Clara's gaze drifted to the lanterns Daniel had revived, glowing steadily against the night. "It's strange," she murmured. "I've spent years surrounded by men in suits, men who talk big, make promises, boast about power. But when everything went dark tonight, not one of them knew what to do, except you." Daniel shifted, uneasy under her gaze. "I'm not like them. I don't have money, status, or—" "Maybe that's the point," she interrupted softly. "Maybe that's why I can actually breathe when I'm talking to you." The words hung between them, fragile but undeniable. Daniel swallowed hard, caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. He'd been burned before, humiliated, abandoned, but Clara's eyes held no mockery, only sincerity. A faint breeze rustled the garden hedges, carrying the scent of roses. Clara's hand brushed his, accidental at first, then deliberate. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's reply came just as quietly. "You don't need to thank me." But the truth was, in that instant, neither wanted to pull away. Victor stood near the ballroom's open doors, a glass of wine clenched so tightly in his hand that it nearly shattered. The echo of applause still rang in his ears, each clap a nail in his pride. He had orchestrated the perfect trap, set the janitor up to fail, humiliate him in front of everyone, and prove that Clara needed him, not some nobody, to hold her empire steady. But instead, Daniel had turned the whole room against him. Victor's jaw ticked as he watched Clara and Daniel in the garden, their heads bent close, a spark obvious even from a distance. It was intolerable. "Sir," one of his assistants approached nervously. "Should we—" "Leave me," Victor snapped. His voice dripped with venom. The assistant scurried away. Victor tilted back the wine, draining it in one furious gulp, before setting the glass down so hard it cracked. His reflection glared back at him from the polished window, his own face twisted with rage. "That janitor thinks he's won her admiration," Victor muttered under his breath. "He'll learn what happens when a man like me is crossed." Inside his mind, plans began to form. He knew Daniel was broke, weighed down by debts and single parenthood. Men like him could be crushed with the right pressure. A few phone calls, the right whispers to the right people, and suddenly Daniel's world could unravel. But Victor wasn't just thinking business. No, this was personal now. Clara's respect, her attention, her warmth had been stolen from him, and he would do whatever it took to drag Daniel back into the shadows where he belonged. He slipped away from the ballroom crowd, stepping into the shadows of the corridor. Pulling out his phone, he dialed a number. "Find me everything on Daniel Carter," Victor ordered coldly. "Where he works, where he lives, who he owes, every weakness, dig it up." The voice on the other end hesitated. "And if he has a child?" Victor's lips curved into a cruel smile. "Then we'll see how far the janitor is willing to go to protect her." For a moment he stood in the quiet hall, breathing slowly, letting his anger crystallize into resolve. Daniel may have won the crowd tonight, but Victor had influence, wealth, and power, the kind that could crush men without leaving a mark. Back in the garden, laughter floated from Clara and Emily. The sound tightened his chest like a vice. "No," he whispered to himself, "this isn't over, not by a long shot." With a final glance at the glowing lanterns, the very proof of Daniel's triumph, Victor turned sharply on his heel, already plotting his next move. If Daniel thought fixing a machine was enough to earn Clara's heart, he was about to discover how ruthless real battles could be. The following week, Daniel's life should have felt lighter. The gala incident was behind him, and for the first time in years, he noticed Clara's presence lingering in his thoughts. Her laugh, her eyes, the way her hand had brushed his. It all replayed at odd hours, leaving him both hopeful and unsettled. Emily was happier too. At school, she couldn't stop telling her friends about the night her dad saved a party with his magic hands. Daniel chuckled whenever she brought it up, though deep down he worried. Attention wasn't something he wanted. Attention brought problems. And the problems arrived faster than he expected. On Tuesday morning, Daniel pulled into the parking lot of his apartment complex to find a sleek black car waiting near his building. The windows were tinted, the kind of luxury vehicle that didn't belong in his neighborhood. Emily, bouncing in the passenger seat, tilted her head. "Daddy, is that a movie star car?" Daniel's gut tightened. "Maybe, stay close to me, kiddo." When they stepped out, the car door clicked open and a tall man in a sharp suit emerged. He smiled, but the gesture didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Carter," the man said smoothly, "I work for Victor Hale. My employer asked me to deliver a message." Daniel's fists clenched instinctively. "I don't need messages from him." The man ignored his tone, pulling a folded piece of paper from his jacket and handing it over. "It's about your outstanding debts. Seems some banks are considering calling in loans early. My employer has influence." Daniel unfolded the paper. His heart sank. It listed every loan he'd ever taken, car, medical bills, even overdue rent, things he hadn't realized were still hanging over him. Emily tugged his sleeve, sensing the tension. "Daddy, what's wrong?" Daniel forced a smile for her, folding the paper quickly. "Nothing, sweetheart. Go inside, okay? I'll be right there." The man's smirk deepened. "Victor doesn't like being embarrassed, Mr. Carter. You humiliated him at the gala. Now he's simply making sure you remember your place." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "A single father has a lot to lose. Be smart. Keep your distance from Miss Steele." With that, he returned to the car, the engine purring as it rolled away. Daniel stood frozen, the weight of the warning pressing down on him. He'd faced hardship before, but this was different. Victor wasn't just coming for him, he was circling Emily, too. When he finally walked inside, Emily was already setting up her toy tea set on the table. "Daddy, you look mad. Did that man say something mean?" Daniel knelt, pulling her close, kissing the top of her head. "Don't worry about him, Peanut. I'll handle it." But as he held her, his jaw tightened. He wasn't sure how long he could shield her from a man with Victor's power. And yet, deep down, one thing was certain: he would fight. For Emily, for their fragile peace, for the chance, just maybe, for a future with Clara. Clara Steele was used to bad news. As CEO, she'd faced board rebellions, lawsuits, even a hacking scandal that nearly crippled the company. But what her assistant whispered that morning in the office made her blood run cold. "Victor Espin making moves," the assistant said, eyes flicking nervously to the closed door. "Rumors about Daniel Carter, his debts, his apartment, even his job here. Victor's behind it." Clara leaned back in her chair, her fingers tightening around the pen she held. "Of course he is." Victor had always been ruthless, but dragging an innocent man, and his little girl, into his petty revenge was beyond cruel. Images from the gala flashed in her mind. Daniel standing steady in the glow of the lanterns, Emily's small hand gripping his, the crowd cheering. Clara had seen something then she couldn't ignore: strength, integrity, heart. And now Victor wanted to crush it. She rose from her desk, pacing to the tall glass windows that overlooked the city. Her reflection stared back. The powerful CEO, perfectly polished, yet beneath the armor, she felt a stirring of anger she hadn't in years. She pulled out her phone and dialed Victor directly. He answered on the second ring, his voice slick with smugness. "Clara, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "You know exactly why I'm calling," she said sharply. "Stay away from Daniel and his daughter." A laugh crackled through the line. Clara, you can't seriously be defending that janitor. He embarrassed me in front of our investors. He made you look foolish for entertaining him. I'm simply restoring balance." "Balance?" Her voice iced over. "You're terrorizing a single father and a child." Victor's tone hardened. "Then let this be a lesson. If you want to keep your company untangled from his mess, distance yourself, publicly, or his fall will drag you down with him." Clara ended the call before he could say more, her chest tight with fury. For a long moment she stood in silence, her mind racing. Then she made a decision. That evening she drove to Daniel's apartment. Emily opened the door, her face lighting up. "Miss Clara, Daddy's fixing the sink again, come in." Daniel appeared, startled, wiping his hands on a towel. "Clara, what are you?" "I know about Victor," she cut in gently, her eyes locking on his. "He's threatening you, he's threatening Emily, and I won't stand by and watch." Daniel frowned, torn between pride and worry. "Clara, you don't have to get involved. This is my problem." She stepped closer, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Maybe, but sometimes, even the strongest people need someone in their corner. Let me be that person." For the first time, Daniel didn't have an answer. Emily looked between them, her small hand slipping into Clara's, as if sealing an unspoken pact. In that quiet, Daniel realized they weren't alone anymore. The storm came fast. 2 days after Clara's visit, Daniel arrived at work only to find his badge deactivated. Security guards blocked his way. His supervisor wouldn't meet his eyes. "I'm sorry, Daniel. Orders from above. You're terminated." He didn't need to ask who was behind it. Victor had struck. That night, Daniel sat in the small kitchen with Emily asleep in the next room. Bills piled on the table. His chest ached with the weight of failure. He had fought so hard to keep life steady for his daughter, and now it was slipping. A knock came at the door. Clara stood there, dressed simply, her eyes filled with resolve. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped inside and placed a folder on the table. "What's this?" Daniel asked, his voice heavy. "A job offer," she said. "Head of operations at Steel Enterprises. You have the skills, Daniel. You've fixed systems, solved problems, led under pressure. You belong in more than a boiler room." He shook his head. "Clara, this is too much, Victor already thinks." "Victor doesn't decide your worth," she interrupted firmly. "You do, and so does Emily. She looks at you like you're her whole world, and you are." Daniel stared at her, torn between pride and desperation. "Clara, if I take this, Victor will." "Victor S. finished," her tone sharpened. "The board is already tired of his games. After what he pulled, I made sure every investor knew the truth. He's losing influence fast." Silence hung for a moment, broken only by the hum of the fridge. Finally, Daniel exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "I don't know if I can give Emily the life she deserves." Clara stepped closer, her hand resting on his. "You already do. You give her love, courage, and safety. That's more than most children ever get. The rest, we can build together." Something in Daniel's chest cracked open. He hadn't let himself imagine a future with anyone else, not since Emily's mother left. But here was Clara, offering not just a job, not just protection, but a chance at family. Before he could reply, a small voice piped up from the hallway. Emily stood there, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy, Miss Clara, are you staying for breakfast tomorrow?" Clara crouched down, smiling softly. "If your daddy wants me to, I'd love to." Emily grinned sleepily and padded back to bed, leaving a silence filled with possibility. Daniel looked at Clara, searching her face. He found no pity there, only strength and something he hadn't seen in years, hope. He reached across the table, lacing his fingers with hers. "Then stay." And for the first time in a long time, Daniel Carter believed the future might be brighter than the past.